Gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Turner, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Geithner, the title of this hearing is Europe's sovereign debt crisis, causes, consequences for the United States, and lessons learned. Focusing on that portion of lessons learned, I have a concern as we look to the issue of Europe that stems from my concern from the bailout process that has gone through in the United States. And largely, as we look to what occurred in the U.S. with bailouts, I think many people like me have a significant concern of conflicts of interest, issues of lack of transparency, and a lack of openness. Mr. Secretary, you, as we look to the auto bailouts, you served in 3 different roles. You served as the Secretary of the Treasury, looking at issues of the taxpayers' dollars and exercising the ownership interest by the United States to the extent that the United States became an owner frequently in the auto bailouts. You served as co-chair of the Auto Task Force and board member of the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation. You were not merely involved in the GM bailout, but you were simultaneously leading all of the agencies on every side of the deal in one role or another. And throughout these processes, you have refused and Treasury has refused to answer questions. You have provided unredacted documents or disclosed relative information that people have asked to try to hold accountable the Treasury to find out what has occurred, where the tax dollars have gone. And one of those issues obviously affects Delphi salary retirees, where 20,000 people across this country lost a significant portion of their profits as the 3 roles of the Treasury, the co-chair of the Auto Task Force, and the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation picked winners and losers, and they were ones that, with our tax dollars, were picked as losers. If you looked at that hardship that was imposed on tens of thousands of Delphi salary retirees left in the wake of the GM bailout, and then you have concern as to how we look to the European crisis and whether or not similar conflicts of interest, taxpayers' dollars, and a lack of openness or transparency. As you know, as the Delphi salary retirees have tried to get the information as to what happened, how they lost their pensions, the 3 roles of yourself, both in Treasury, PBGC, and the Auto Task Force, have been closed. Documents have not been provided. Redacted documents have been provided, if at all. Most recently, we have the PBGC acknowledging your role as the ultimate authority in the decision to terminate Delphi pensions. With the GM bailout, you were involved in many of the decisions to terminate these. But yet there is this sense of how do we have a system through bailouts where a person like yourself would have the 3 roles that conflicts exist, and yet Congress have no ability for oversight, individual who lost their pensions, who don't have an ability to hold you or Treasury accountable in seeking additional information. And as you know, this comes at a significant price. We have the $1.3 billion loss on the Chrysler deal, the $25 or so billion that's at risk in the GM bailout. If we look to the European issue, how can we be assured, looking at the performance of what occurred in the prior bailouts, that we're not going to have this issue of conflicts of interest, of lack of transparency, that there will be some openness, that Congress, that people who are impacted by this will have access to information? I sit here as a member of Congress knowing that Treasury and is not answering the basic questions about the decision-making that occurred with the Delphi salary retirees losing their pensions, and wondering how then can we look to perhaps a European issue and not know whether or not our own government is going to be willing to tell us the decisions that are being made and the basic financial underpinnings of the decisions that occur. Mr. Secretary?
Good questions. Let me try to be responsive. Our financial crisis caused enormous damage across the country, not just in the case of Delphi, but that's a good example of how much damage caused by the causes that led to this crisis. We have, of course, cooperated very closely with this committee and every other congressional committee in making sure we are as responsive as possible for all your requests for information, and we'll continue to do that.
Oh, Mr. Secretary, does that mean that you'd be willing to release unredacted versions of the documents that, I mean, you say you've tried. If you send us documents that are redacted, or you, in litigation that's pending, send redacted documents, you're not being forthcoming. That's not the, here's what your government did.
Of course, I disagree with you on that, but we'll try to be as forthcoming as we can. But let me just point out, Every action we took in this crisis has been subject to not just the oversight of 4 separate independent bodies established by the Congress to oversee our actions, but by all the congressional committees involved. All the actions we took in the auto context were reviewed and validated by the courts, which is a good set of checks and balances in our country.
Well, no, wait a minute, sir. The one with the Delphi retirees is still pending, and you have not been
time has
participating.
expired. The Secretary can summarize his answer.
And I just want to point out that we have provided an incredible level of transparency over every decision we made with the taxpayers' money in that context. The roles you described to me are roles Congress gave me and my predecessors. There is no conflict in those roles. And again, we have a very strong, robust set of checks and balances in this country, appropriately so, that gives you the ability and the authority and the right to oversee everything we've done in this context, which I know you'll continue to do. And I respect and honor that process.
Gentleman's time has expired.